everyone. Today I am going to talk about one of the most important electrolyte, that is potassium, and its disorder. Potassium is the major intracellular cation. The homeostatic mechanism maintains the plasma potassium concentration between the normal range, that is 3.5 to 5 milliequivalent per liter, despite a marked variation in the dietary potassium intake. In a healthy individual, at steady state, the entire daily intake of the potassium is excreted out, approximately 90% in the urine and 10% in the feces. So that is why kidney plays a dominant role in potassium homeostasis. More than 98% of the potassium remains in the intracellular space, mostly the muscle and the bone cells. The internal potassium balance is maintained by hormonal regulations, for example, hormones like insulin, catecholamines, and aldosterone. Regulation of potassium homeostasis. The absorbed potassium from the GIT is largely redistributed from blood into the intracellular space by the active transport through this sodium potassium ATPase, and this is stimulated by insulin and catecholamines. So individual with normal kidney function, potassium is freely filtered in the glomerulus and it is reabsorbed in the proximal tubule and the loop of the Henle. Only less than 10% of the potassium actually reaches the distal nephron. Potassium excretion in the distal nephron and the collecting duct is stimulated by aldosterone, increased urine flow rate, and increased sodium delivery to the distal nephron. Potassium intake may also promote renal excretion via the enteric sensing of the potassium and stimulation of aldosterone release from the adrenal gland. So how kidney handles the potassium? If you see it briefly, so potassium is freely filtered across the glomerulus. It got reabsorbed by the PCT and the thick ascending limb of the loop of the Henle. So only a small amount reaches the distal nephron. Reabsorption in the PCT is through paracellular mechanism and through solvent drag mechanism. In the thick ascending limb of the loop of the Henle, both transcellular and paracellular pathways act. So what happened in the thick ascending limb of the loop of the Henle? So at the luminal membrane, the sodium, potassium and chloride, they are reabsorbed through sodium potassium chloride co-transporter. And at the basolateral membrane, sodium is secreted via the sodium potassium ATPase and chloride is secreted via the chloride pump. The potassium is recycled into the luminal side through potassium channel, that is the ROMK, renal outer medullary potassium channel. And this generates a lumen positive charge and hence it drives more of the sodium reabsorption via the paracellular pathway. At the principal cell of the cortical collecting duct, which play a dominant role in renal potassium secretion. In principal cell, the sodium is reabsorbed through this epithelial sodium channel, and this creates a lumen negative potential difference which drives passive potassium exit through potassium channel. So there are two major potassium channels which mediate distal tubular potassium secretion. One is the secretory potassium channel, that is the renal outer medullary potassium channel, and other one is the flow sensitive BK channel or the big kidney channel. So this ROMK, it mediates the bulk of the potassium secretion actually, whereas increase in the distal urine flow rate or on genetic absence of this channel, the potassium secretion is done by the BK channel. ROMK is upregulated through aldosterone dependent and independent pathway, and BK channel, as we have discussed, it is mediate the flow induced potassium secretion. Functions of the potassium. The intracellular to the extracellular potassium gradient it reflects the resting membrane potential. And this is critical for maintaining the cellular function, mostly of the excitable tissues like muscle and the nerve tissues. The membrane potential is preserved by the sodium-potassium ATPase channel. The nerve and the muscle cells rely on the maintenance of the membrane potential for electrical excitation, such as contraction of the muscles and transmission of the nerve pulses. So, disorder in the plasma potassium give rise to manifestation in the excitable tissue, such as the heart and the nervous system. So that is why maintaining the serum potassium in the normal range is very important, because change in the serum potassium level, either direction, either the hypokalemia or hyperkalemia, is associated with higher mortality. So which is shown by this U-shaped curve. So here either hypokalemia or hyperkalemia is associated with increased mortality. So now we'll discuss about hyperkalemia. So hyperkalemia is defined as plasma potassium level of more than 5.5 milliequivalent per liter. It occurs up to 10% of the hospitalized patients. There are a certain group of patients where the risk of hyperkalemia is high. So for example, patients with diabetes. So here, because of a state of hypertonicity, because of insulin deficiency, due to hyporenemic hypoaldosteronism, the risk of hyperkalemia is very high. In CKD patients, metabolic acidosis, decreased GFR, tubulointerstitial disease, all these contribute to the development of hyperkalemia. AKI patients with decreased GFR, decreased urine flow and tissue injury can contribute to development of hyperkalemia. And patients with cardiovascular disease who are on multiple cardiac medications, they are also at increased risk of hyperkalemia. So these patients are high risk for development of hyperkalemia, and also there is increased risk of hyperkalemia associated morbidity and mortality. So if you see the drugs which are associated with risk of hyperkalemia, they are the RAS inhibitor, heparin, beta blocker, NSAID, trimethoprim and pentamidine. So the RAS inhibitor or the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system inhibitor, so they are recommended in patients with cardiovascular disease, and it has a mortality benefit in patients with congestive heart failure and the MI patients, myocardial infarction patients. But many patients receive the suboptimal dose of these drugs, or they discontinue the treatment because of associated increased risk of recurrent hyperkalemia. So if you compare the patients who are on maximum RAS inhibitor with those who are on suboptimal dosing because of this discontinuation, so the suboptimal dosing group are associated with higher mortality. That is why the European Society of Cardiology, they recommend that maximum RAS inhibitor therapy as tolerated should be considered when indicated, and hyperkalemia if developed, it should be treated, and the reinitiation of the drug should be considered after resolution of the acute hyperkalemia. So what are the causes of hyperkalemia? When we'll see the causes, first thing is we have to distinguish hyperkalemia from pseudo-hyperkalemia. So, which is the artifactual increase in the serum potassium level due to release of the potassium during venipuncture, either because of the fist, tight fist or clenching, or there is increase in the cellular element like thrombocytosis or leukocytosis. So when serum potassium concentration exceeds the plasma potassium concentration by more than 0.5 millimole per liter in the absence of a clinical risk factor, this is the pseudo-hyperkalemia. Then the true hyperkalemia, which can be either of the three reasons. One is the cellular redistribution, second one is the excess intake of the potassium, third one is the decreased renal excretion. So in the cellular redistribution, the causes are metabolic acidosis, Hypertonicity, for example, use of the hypertonic drugs like mannitol, hypertonic saline, or IVIG. And the mechanism here is because of the solvent drag mechanism. Then insulin deficiency, use of beta blocker, hyperkalemic periodic palsy, cell injury, for example, rhabdomyolysis or the tumor lysis syndrome. So we have to remember one thing in case of metabolic acidosis. So the hyperkalemia, because of the redistribution, cellular redistribution, only occurs in hyperchloremic, normal and N-gap metabolic acidosis. Because the impermeability of the cell membrane to the chloride anion, the electrical neutrality is maintained by the potassium exit, right? So other metabolic acidosis, for example, lactic acidosis or diabetic ketoacidosis, here the mechanism is not the cellular redistribution. In case of lactic acidosis, the hyperkalemia is due to loss of the cell integrity as a result of cell ischemia. And in case of DKA, it is due to the result of insulin deficiency and hypertonicity. Okay. So coming to the second cause, which is the excess intake. Here also we have to remember that hyperkalemia due to excess intake is almost always occur in the setting of impaired renal potassium excretion. Third cause is the decreased renal excretion, which again can be due to either of these three reasons. One is decreased distal delivery of the sodium. Second one is the mineralocorticoid deficiency. And third one is the defect of the cortical collecting tubule. So decreased distal delivery of the sodium. For example, in case of acute kidney injury, there is oliguria and reduced GFR, which leads to reduction in the distal delivery of the sodium and water, and hence it impairs the potassium secretion. In chronic kidney disease, the nephron dropout and reduction in the collecting tubule mass leads to decline in the distal potassium secretion. Decreased mineralocorticoid activity due to disturbance in the renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system pathway will impair the renal potassium secretion. This can be the result of either disease or any drug effect, which affect the pathway from renin secretion to the aldosterone receptor. So anywhere it can affect the mineralocorticoid effect. So for example, when there is impaired renin release occur in case of elderly patients, in patients of diabetes, or patients using NSAID, beta blocker, tacrolimus, etc. Then a direct renin inhibitor, use of AC inhibitor, use of angiotensin receptor blocker, then the impaired aldosterone metabolism, which is seen in adrenal disease, or use of drugs like heparin and ketoconazole. Then the aldosterone receptor blocker like spironolactone, or the sodium channel blocker like amiloride, triamterene and trimethoprim. The third one is the distal tubular defect. It means the interstitial renal disease that specifically affect the distal nephron. Here the GFR is mildly reduced and the aldosterone level is normal. So the condition where it is seen are patients with renal transplant, amyloidosis, SLE and urinary obstruction. Drugs causing hyperkalemia due to the distal tubular defect are the potassium sparing diuretics like the spironolactone and use of trimethoprim, pentamidine, etc. So if we summarize the drugs causing hyperkalemia and its mechanism, so there are various mechanisms by which drugs are causing hyperkalemia. So first one is the defective aldosterone signaling, where impaired renin production occur in case of beta blocker and use of NSAID. Then the impaired renin-angiotensin signaling due to the AC inhibitor and the ARBs. Impaired aldosterone synthesis, which is seen with heparin and ketoconazole. Then the mineralocorticoid receptor blockade, as seen in spironolactone and eplerenone. Then the second mechanism is the defective distal electrogenic sodium reabsorption, that is the epithelial sodium channel blockade due to the use of amiloride, triamterene and trimethoprim. Cellular potassium translocation, it is affected by the changes in the transcellular transporters, which is seen with use of alpha agonist, beta blocker, digoxin, succinylcholine, etc. And solvent drag mechanism is seen with use of the hypertonic saline, that is the mannitol. So coming to the clinical features of hyperkalemia. Hyperkalemia has a depolarizing effect on the heart. So that is why this is manifested by the changes on the ECG. So the specific ECG changes seen in hyperkalemia are the peak T wave, wide PR interval, wide QRS duration, then loss of P wave and the sinusoidal wave. Hyperkalemia can also cause the neuromuscular manifestations. For example, paresthesia, fasciculation in the arms and legs, ascending paralysis with eventual flaccid quadriplegia can also be seen sometime with severe hyperkalemia. So now the management of hyperkalemia. The management of hyperkalemia depends on the magnitude of increase in the plasma potassium concentration and the presence or absence of the ECG changes or the neuromuscular symptoms. So it can be acute or chronic. Acute treatment is indicated for the marked ECG changes or the severe neuromuscular weakness. So how to manage acute hyperkalemia? First thing is to stabilize the myocardial cell membrane, so which is done by the calcium. So we have to give IV calcium. The onset is very fast and the duration is up to 30 to 60 minutes. Second mechanism for treatment of hyperkalemia is the potassium redistribution into the intracellular space with use of IV insulin. So here we have to give insulin along with glucose to prevent the hypoglycemia. And second one is use of the nebulized salbutamol. So insulin generally takes the onset is around 15 minutes and for beta agonist the onset is little late, that is 30 minutes. But both the duration is almost 2 hours. The third mechanism is that the reduction of the total body potassium, so which can be done either by use of soda biker, diuretics, hemodialysis, or by using the potassium binder. So IV sodium bicarbonate is useful when there is hyperkalemia in a metabolic acidosis situation. Diuretics can be given when there is hypervolemia or the non-oliguric patients, and hemodialysis for patients with oliguria or who are on end-stage renal disease. During this treatment, we have to monitor the potassium frequently and we have to also look for the ECG changes and other symptoms. So if you see the potassium binder, so until recently only the SPS, that is the sodium polystyrene sulfonate, was the only potassium binder which was available for the management of hyperkalemia. However, two other binder like this Spectrum and the SZC, which is sodium zirconium cyclosilicate, these are now approved by the US and the European Society. So only we have to discuss the mechanism of action. So like in case of SPS, the potassium binding occur in exchange for the sodium. In case of Petromor, it occur in exchange of calcium, and in case of this sodium zirconium cyclosilicate, so potassium binding occur in exchange of H plus and sodium ion. So move on to the next topic, that is hypokalemia. So hypokalemia can be classified as mild, moderate or severe according to the plasma potassium level. The major causes of hypokalemia can be classified according to whether there is a transcellular shift or there is total body potassium loss occurred. Because less than 2% of the total body potassium is extracellular, that is why small potassium shift from extracellular fluid to the intracellular space, it results in hypokalemia. So multiple drugs can cause it, for example, use of beta agonist, use of insulin, and any stressful conditions like sepsis or coronary ischemia which cause release of the catecholamine. All this can lead to the translular shifting and hypokalemia. Other conditions like hyperthyroidism, hypothermia, metabolic alkalosis can also cause hypokalemia because of this transcellular shifting. Then the loss of potassium can be either due to renal loss or the extrarenal loss. So we know that all kind of GI fluid or gastrointestinal fluid, starting from gastric juice to pancreatic juice or the intestinal fluid, all this contain high amount of potassium. So the fluid, like in case of diarrhea, vomiting or nasogastric drainage or the ileostomy output, all this can lead to potassium loss and hypokalemia. Renal loss can be due to drugs or due to the renal tubular acidosis. So drugs like glucocorticoids, aminoglycosides, amphotericin and diuretics. So most commonly the loop diuretic and the thiazide diuretic. So the mechanism here for diuretics are it cause inhibition of the sodium potassium chloride cotransporter and hence increasing the flow to the distal tubule. And second one, by causing volume depletion, it causes activation of the renin-angiotensin pathway. So the clinical manifestation of hypokalemia. So mostly the cardiac changes like the ECG changes. So the specific ECG changes for hypokalemia are the prominent U wave, the shallow T wave or the ST depression. So here we can compare the ECG changes of hypokalemia and hyperkalemia. So in hyperkalemia there is tall peak T wave, in hypokalemia there is shallow T wave. So these are the specific ECG changes seen with hypokalemia. Respiratory symptoms can also be seen in case of hypokalemia. For example, the respiratory muscle weakness, respiratory failure, and sometimes muscle cramp, rhabdomyolysis, and myoglobinuria can also be seen with severe hypokalemia. So approach to hypokalemia. So first thing is to rule out the pseudo hypokalemia, which occurs secondary to lab error. The most common cause is acute leukemia, where high TLC count takes up the potassium when the blood is stored at the room temperature for a prolonged period of time. So in case of true hypokalemia, first thing is we have to look for any life-threatening signs, symptoms are present or not. If there are signs, symptoms, fatal signs, symptoms, then first thing is we have to treat the hypokalemia. If it is not there, then we have to work up for hypokalemia. So first thing is we have to send the urinary potassium level. So 24-hour urinary potassium level is the ideal one, but it is cumbersome and not feasible every time. So we can take spot urinary potassium. So if it is less than 15 millimole per day, then it is due to the extrarenal loss. If it is more than 15 millimole, then it is due to the renal loss. So if it is extrarenal loss, we have to look for the acid-base status. So if there is metabolic acidosis, the most common cause is the GI potassium loss. If there is metabolic alkalosis, then the cause of hypokalemia may be due to diuretics, the remote vomiting or the NG output. So when there is renal potassium loss, which is evident from the spot urinary potassium of more than 15 millimole per day, so we have to calculate the TTKG. So TTKG means this is the transtubular potassium gradient. So this is an index reflecting the conservation of potassium in the cortical collecting duct of the kidney. In case of hyperkalemia, the TTKG normal value will be more than 10, and in case of hypokalemia, it should be less than 3. So if it is less than 3, it reflects the adequate renal handling. But if it is more than 3, it means there is renal potassium loss. So in our case, so we are seeing this one, so there is renal potassium loss. So this transtubular potassium gradient, it would be more than 3. And this is the formula to calculate the TTKG. So after that, we have to look for the blood pressure, whether the patient is having normal blood pressure or high blood pressure. If there is high BP, Then we have to send the aldosterone, renin and the cortisol level. So there are four if there is increased aldosterone with increased renin, it may be due to presence of malignant hypertension, renovascular disease, or the renin secreting tumor. If hyperaldosteronism is present with decreased renin level, then the cause is due to the primary aldosteronism. Low aldosterone with high cortisol is seen in Cushing syndrome, and low aldosterone with normal cortisol is seen with Liddle syndrome. But if the patient is having normal BP or the low blood pressure, then we have to look for the acidosis part, acid-base status. So if there is metabolic acidosis, then there is presence of diabetic ketoacidosis or the renal tubular acidosis. But if there is metabolic alkalosis, then we have to look for the urinary chloride level. If it is less than 10, so it may be because of the vomiting. When it is more than 10, the causes may be the genetic syndromes like the Bartter syndrome or the Gentleman syndrome. Then coming to the management of hypokalemia. First thing, we have to identify the cause of hypokalemia and we have to stop the ongoing loss. If the patient is asymptomatic, then oral potassium supplementation is sufficient. But if the patient is symptomatic, then we have to give the intravenous potassium supplementation. Maximum rate of potassium supplementation IV can be up to 40 milliequivalent per hour in case of unstable arrhythmia. We have to also correct the magnesium deficiency along with the potassium. So there are 4 types of potassium preparation, the commercial potassium preparation available. So most commonly used one is the potassium chloride. Potassium phosphate also used if there is concomitant hypophosphatemia, and potassium citrate or potassium bicarbonate, they are used for concomitant metabolic acidosis.